Earthquake in Turkey and Syria kills hundreds with fears casualties will rise. 7.8 magnitude tremor hit early on Monday, with second major quake mid-morning hampering rescue efforts. More than 1,700 people were killed when an earthquake struck central Turkey and northwest Syria, in one of the most powerful quakes in the region in at least a century, while a second powerful tremor hours later threatened to overwhelm rescue efforts. Thousands more were injured as the quake wiped out entire sections of major cities in a region filled with millions of people who have fled the civil war in Syria. The magnitude 7.8 quake, which hit in the early darkness of a winter morning, was followed by a second, 7.7 quake in the middle of the day on Monday, as rescuers in both countries were still attempting to search for survivors. Turkish state broadcaster TRT showed images of panicked people sheltering in the street as buildings around them quaked during the aftershock in the town of Kahramanmaraş, north of Gaziantep. The Turkish president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, said 912 people were killed, 5,383 injured, and 2,818 buildings had collapsed. In Syria, already wrecked by more than 11 years of civil war, the health ministry said more than 326 people had been killed and 1,042 injured. In the Syrian rebel-held northwest, rescuers said 147 people had died. The toll was expected to rise as rescue workers and residents searched frantically for survivors under the rubble of crushed buildings in cities on both sides of the border. The quake struck at 4:17 a.m. local time, 1:17 a.m. GMT, at a depth of about 17.9 kilometers, 11 miles, near the Turkish city of Gaziantep, which is home to about 2 million people, the U.S. Geological Survey said. Television images from Turkey showed shocked people standing in the snow in their pajamas, watching rescuers dig through the debris of damaged homes. Buildings were leveled while many people were still asleep. Tremors were felt as far away as Lebanon, Greece, Israel, and the island of Cyprus. In the southern Turkish town of Gaziantep, 150 miles from the border with Syria and 50 miles from the epicenter of the earthquake in Kahramanmaraş, residents felt aftershocks hours later. "We woke up with a jolt as the electricity was off. We laid still and waited for the shaking to finish. Our house was full of broken glass," said Shinan Sahan, a tradesperson in Gaziantep. "We used our phone's flashlight so we could get dressed, and hurried out of the house. Anyone able to save themselves has now fled somewhere. I have relatives in Kahramanmaraş, their houses were destroyed." He added, "I was in Istanbul when the big earthquake hit in 1999, this was more severe than that." He broke off as another aftershock hit. Images from Gaziantep appeared to show that the earthquake caused the collapse of the city's historic castle, an ancient and imposing stone structure atop a hill used as an observation point during Roman times. The head of the Turkish Red Crescent, the biggest humanitarian organization in Turkey and part of the International Red Cross, said it was mobilizing resources for the region and urged people to evacuate damaged homes. The head of Turkey's disaster management agency said all capabilities of our state were mobilized after the quake, warning civilians to keep communication to urgent texts only to help emergency services find survivors. Images on Turkish television showed rescuers digging through the rubble of leveled buildings in the city of Kahramanmaraş and neighboring Gaziantep, where entire high-rise blocks were destroyed. A fire lit up the night sky in one image from Kahramanmaraş, although its origin remained unclear. Buildings also crumbled in the cities of Adıyaman, Malatya, and Diyarbakır, where people rushed out on the street in panic. Residents in the town of Pazark said they feared for those trapped under fallen buildings. Nihat Al-Tundag said the powerful shocks from the earthquake woke his family. Set said civilians were desperately trying to help dig their neighbors out from under collapsed buildings. "Two of my friends are under the rubble now, we are trying to reach them," he said. Erdogan, who will be under pressure to oversee an effective response to the disaster heading to an election on 14th of May, said search and rescue teams had been dispatched to the affected areas. "We do not know how high the number of dead and injured will go. Our hope is to get through this disaster with the least loss," he said in a speech. "This is the biggest disaster we've experienced in the last century after the 1939 Erzincan earthquake," he added, citing an incident in which more than 32,000 people were killed in eastern Turkey. The Hop Altınok, an official with the local opposition Republican People's Party (CHP) in the town of Malatya, 162 miles from the epicenter, described the tremor as the biggest earthquake I've ever experienced, the longest and the strongest. Lots of buildings were destroyed, there's rubble everywhere, he said. People are overwhelmed. There is heavy snowfall and it's badly affecting rescue efforts, he said. The Syrian Health Ministry reported damage across the provinces of Aleppo, Latakia, Hama, and Tartus, where Russia is leasing a naval facility. Even before the tragedy, buildings in Aleppo, Syria's pre-war commercial hub, often collapsed due to the dilapidated infrastructure after more than a decade of war, as well as little oversight to ensure safety of new construction projects, some built illegally. The Syrian Civil Defense, a rescue service known as the White Helmets that works to save those trapped under debris from airstrikes, said it had declared a state of emergency to rescue the many people feared trapped under collapsed buildings in areas around Idlib and across opposition-held areas in northwestern Syria. In a statement, the organization described a catastrophic situation with buildings collapsed or suffering major cracks, hundreds injured and stranded, dozens dead, and a lack of services as well as safe shelters and assembly points in stormy and snowy weather conditions and low temperatures. The group also added a plea for aid from the international community to prevent the situation from worsening and to pressure both the Syrian government and their backers in Moscow to hold back on airstrikes in the area to prevent further tragedy. People in Damascus, as well as in the Lebanese cities of Beirut and Tripoli, ran into the street on foot and took to their cars to get away from their buildings in case of collapses, witnesses said.